Hello, everyone. The architecture of infinity is about how the quest for good explanations transforms the universe. This is the core philosophical arguments of David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity. Consider the sheer magnitude of this proposition. For the vast majority of human history, progress was virtually non existent because our ancestors did not understand the engine of change. They assumed the universe was driven by capricious gods, unknowable magic, or static laws of nature that dictated a fixed human condition. But the reality is far more profound and liberating. All progress in the universe, whether it is the technological mastery of our environment, the eradication of fatal diseases, or the establishment of just political systems, is driven by a single infinite phenomenon, the human quest for good explanations. An explanation is not just a description of what happens, it is a structural account of reality. It tells us how the unseen mechanisms of the world operate. When we demand that our explanations be good, we are demanding that they be intricately tied to the physical truth, immune to easy variation. This relentless pursuit does not merely observe the universe, it actively transforms it. It takes raw, dormant matter and rearranges it into cities, spacecraft, and life saving medicines. The quest for good explanations is the fundamental architecture of human survival and cosmic evolution. Without it, we are passive victims of nature's whims. With it, we become active sculptors of reality. We are no longer bystanders. We are the very mechanism through which the universe begins to understand itself. This intellectual framework fundamentally shifts our place in the cosmos, revealing that the pursuit of knowledge is not a luxury, but the most powerful physical force in existence. This brings us to a critical realization about how this knowledge is actually formed. Now, consider this. How do we actually acquire this transformative knowledge? The traditional assumption, an epistemological error known as empiricism, suggests that we are passive receivers. It promotes the blank slate fallacy, the idea that nature writes knowledge directly into our brains through sensory experience. Imagine you are trying to understand how the stock market works. Empiricism claims that if you just stare at the fluctuating red and green numbers on a screen long enough, the underlying economic laws will somehow imprint themselves onto your mind. This is entirely false. Knowledge is never passively extracted from observing the world, it is actively created. The true engine of knowledge generation is fallibilism. We do not read the book of nature, we guess its contents. We actively generate bold conjectures and then aggressively filter those guesses through the ruthless sieve of criticism, deploying logic and experiments to strip away the errors. You formulate a hypothesis about a market trend, and reality quickly tells you if your guess was wrong when your portfolio loses value. Knowledge creation is fundamentally a process of trial and error, of theoretical variation and rigorous environmental selection. Our senses do not instruct us, they merely provide the feedback necessary to test our internally generated ideas. Every scientific breakthrough, every innovative business strategy, and every moral advancement began as an unjustified leap of imagination in someone's mind. By recognizing that all our knowledge consists of fallible guesses, we free ourselves from the dogma of absolute certainty and open the door to continuous iterative improvement. This active, critical engagement is the only way the intangible realm of human thought successfully interfaces with objective reality. But here is the catch. Not all guesses are created equal. We must distinguish between myth and actual knowledge. The defining characteristic of a good explanation is that it is intricately constrained by reality. Its internal details cannot be easily swapped out without ruining the entire structural integrity of the concept. Consider the ancient Greek attempt to explain the changing of the seasons using the Persephone myth. The story claims that winter happens because a marriage contract forces Persephone to return to the underworld, causing her mother, the goddess of agriculture, to mourn and freeze the earth. This is a fundamentally bad explanation because it is incredibly easy to vary. You could replace the marriage contract with an arbitrary magic spell, or replace Hades with an angry sorcerer, and the final prediction that winter happens remains completely unchanged. The details of the story are entirely disconnected from the physical world. Contrast this with the true scientific explanation. The Earth's axial tilt. If you change the angle of the Earth's tilt by even a fraction of a degree in your theoretical model, you completely destroy the predictive geometry of the seasons. The outcome dramatically shifts. The theory is tightly constrained by the physical mechanics of planetary motion and solar radiation. A good explanation acts like a highly precise mechanical lock. You cannot arbitrarily file down one of the pins and still expect the key to turn. In our modern world, if an engineer is diagnosing a failing server network, a vague assumption about bad luck is easy to vary and useless. A good explanation pinpoints the exact line of failing code, offering a rigid, testable model of reality. This understanding of knowledge forces us to completely reevaluate the human condition. Popular modern philosophies often oscillate between two deeply pessimistic frameworks. The first is the principle of mediocrity, which dismisses humans as irrelevant chemical scum stranded on a typical, unremarkable planet in a vast, uncaring cosmos. The second is the spaceship Earth metaphor, which argues that we are trapped inside a finite, unchangeable biosphere with strictly limited resources that ruthlessly dictate our survival. Both of these frameworks are fundamentally wrong. They severely underestimate the physical power of explanatory knowledge. Humans are not a biochemical anomaly or passive passengers on a fragile planetary vessel. We are universal constructors. A universal constructor is an entity capable of causing any physical transformation that is not strictly forbidden by the laws of physics, provided it possesses the right explanatory knowledge. We do not just consume resources, we redefine what constitutes a resource. Sand was just dirt until our explanatory knowledge transformed it into the silicon microchips that power our global civilization. We are the apex phenomena of the universe, precisely because we are the only entities that can systematically manipulate the fabric of reality through abstract thought. The cosmos is not a dictatorial cage, it is an open canvas. We are not limited by our biogeography or our biological inheritance. We are limited only by our current lack of knowledge. Recognizing ourselves as universal constructors fundamentally shatters the illusion of static limits, placing human creativity at the absolute center of cosmic evolution and technological mastery. To fully harness our potential as universal constructors, we must internalize what we can outline as the dual axioms of progress. These axioms provide the ultimate framework for navigating a complex universe. The first axiom states a harsh but necessary truth. Problems are inevitable. The universe is not inherently hospitable to human survival or comfort. Friction, error, the constant decay of thermodynamics, and the emergence of unforeseen challenges are fundamental constants of physical reality. No matter how advanced our technology or our social systems become, we will never engineer a flawless paradise. Utopia is a static illusion, a dangerous mirage that suggests a final endpoint to human development. However, this is immediately balanced by the second, profoundly optimistic axiom: problems are soluble. With the right explanatory knowledge, every problem from curing a devastating cellular disease to diverting an asteroid, from resolving an economic crisis to understanding astrophysics can be resolved. There are absolutely no theoretical limits to human reach, so long as the laws of physics do not explicitly forbid the solution. The synthesis of these dual axioms reveals that while we will never stop facing existential threats and structural failures, our survival and flourishing are mathematically guaranteed if we maintain the cultural and the intellectual capacity to continuously correct our errors. Progress is not a destination we arrive at. It is an endless, dynamic process of identifying inevitably emerging problems and deploying human creativity to actively solve them, thereby creating a slightly better set of problems for tomorrow. This perpetual cycle of error correction is the very heartbeat of a thriving civilization, ensuring that our intellectual reach extends infinitely outward into the unknown. This mechanism of continuous problem solving brings us to the concept of replicators, specifically the leap from biological evolution to cultural evolution. In the biological realm, we operate under neo-Darwinism, where knowledge is encoded in genes. This system operates via blind, random variation. A genetic mutation does not know what problem it is trying to solve. It merely relies entirely on the physical survival and the reproduction of the host organism to propagate. Consequently, genetic knowledge possesses severely limited reach, adapting organisms only to highly specific, narrow environmental niches. A polar bear's genetic code is useless in the Sahara Desert. Human cultural evolution, however, operates on a fundamentally different substrate, the meme. A meme is an idea, a behavior, or a technological practice that replicates from mind to mind. Unlike genes, memes undergo rational evolution. They operate via conscious, creative variation and rigorous criticism. When an engineer redesigns an electric vehicle battery, they are not relying on random mutation. They are deliberately conjecturing improvements and aggressively testing them against the laws of physics. Crucially, a meme relies on the survival of the idea itself, meaning the knowledge can easily outlive the biological host who generated it. Because memes are abstract and rationally selectable, they possess infinite reach. They are not bound by local geography or biological timelines. They are capable of spreading across the entire globe instantly and eventually across the cosmos, driving an evolutionary process that is millions of times faster and infinitely more purposeful than natural selection. This transition from genes to rational memes is what elevates humanity from mere biological organisms to architects of the infinite. Not all cultural ideas promote human flourishing. We must examine the deep divide between rational and anti-rational memes, which ultimately dictates the survival or death of civilizations. Anti-rational memes are cultural ideas that survive by actively disabling the host's critical thought. They demand blind obedience, enforce strict dogma, and violently suppress innovation in order to maintain the status quo. Think of a rigid authoritarian regime, much like ancient Sparta, where questioning the state's military doctrine is met with execution. These static societies survive only by systematically destroying human creativity. They view any deviation from tradition as a lethal threat. In stark contrast, rational memes are ideas that survive precisely by inviting aggressive debate and relentless scrutiny. They adapt to reality, eagerly welcome error correction, and rely on the objective truth rather than dogmatic enforcement. Think of a modern, open scientific community, or the dynamic society of ancient Athens, where philosophical inquiry and democratic debate were weaponized to continually refine society's knowledge base. Dynamic societies do not fear the destruction of old ideas, they rely on it. They understand that a culture's strength is not measured by its unwavering adherence to past traditions, but by its structural agility, its ability to identify flaws and pivot rapidly. The battle between static and dynamic societies is the ultimate historical struggle. Our modern prosperity is entirely the result of adopting rational memes that prioritize the continuous, disruptive force of human creativity over the suffocating comfort of dogmatic certainty. Without this mechanism of aggressive intellectual iteration, we would still be trapped in the dark ages of superstition and stagnation. To understand the lethal consequences of anti-rational memes, we must dismantle the popular narrative surrounding societal collapse, perfectly illustrated by the Easter Island trap. The widely accepted theory, popularized by Jared Diamond's biogeographical hypothesis, argues that the civilization's collapse was an inevitable geographic destiny. Diamond dictates that their demise was forced by a lack of pack animals, severe deforestation, and finite geographical limits. This is a profound biogeographical fallacy that completely strips human agency from the equation. It implies that civilizations are merely passive victims of their resource constraints. David Deutsch reveals the deeper epistemological reality. Civilizations collapse not merely due to resource mismanagement, but due to a static culture's absolute inability to innovate solutions. The true failure of Easter Island was an anti-rational culture that violently prioritized the obsessive building of giant stone monuments over inventing sustainable agriculture, advanced maritime navigation, or new technologies that could have saved them. When their environment changed, their dogmatic, static memes prevented them from changing their behavior. Think of a modern corporation that goes bankrupt because its executives rigidly refuse to adopt digital technology, blaming the market instead of their own failure to innovate. Collapse is never purely a physical resource problem. It is an epistemological crisis. The Easter Islanders did not run out of trees. They ran out of the creative capacity to imagine a world where they didn't need trees, or where they could plant new ones. Knowledge, not biogeography, determines survival. A dynamic culture would have built ships, not statues, and navigated past their supposedly finite geographical boundaries. This brings us to a revolutionary understanding of how the universe is actually structured, the principle of emergence. For centuries, the dominant scientific paradigm has been reductionism, the belief that you can fully understand any system merely by breaking it down into its smallest atomic parts. But reductionism is demonstrably false. Intangible, abstract entities like morality, mathematical theorems, and computer programs exert a real, measurable physical force in the universe. Imagine a massive, complex arrangement of dominoes specifically set up to compute prime numbers. At the atomic level, the baseline laws of physics perfectly explain the mechanical transfer of kinetic energy. They tell you exactly how a specific domino falls and hits the next one. However, macroscopic physics completely fails to provide an explanation for why the entire sequence eventually stops on a specific domino. To understand why the chain reaction holds, you have to look at the macro level, the abstraction. The dominoes stop because 641 is a prime number. That mathematical truth is the fundamental, actual cause of the physical outcome in reality. The abstraction dictates the physical arrangement. Today, when a line of code in an algorithmic trading program moves billions of dollars across the globe, it is not the physics of the silicon microchip that explains the market shift. It is the intangible logic of the software. Ideas, computations, and moral imperatives are not mere side effects of moving atoms. They are primary structural drivers of physical reality, proving that the intangible truly rules the material world. When abstract knowledge is properly structured, it occasionally crosses what we call thresholds of infinite reach. Throughout human history, systems that were originally designed for highly specific, narrow problems have unpredictably leaped into universal capacity. Consider the evolution of human communication. Early civilizations used hieroglyphs, which were narrow, specific symbols tied to distinct objects or concepts. You had to invent a new symbol for every new word. But the invention of the alphabet represented a leap to universal writing. Suddenly, a finite set of just 2 dozen letters could express absolutely any possible spoken word, past, present, or future. We saw the same explosive leap with the invention of the printing press. Block printing required carving a single fixed page into wood, a rigid, narrow solution. The leap to movable type introduced universal publishing, where a small finite set of metal letters could be rearranged to print literally any possible book in existence. In modern times, we witnessed mechanical calculators, restricted to fixed arithmetic paths, leap into universal computation via Alan Turing's conceptualization of the Turing machine. Now, a single physical system, your smartphone or laptop, can compute any computable function in the entire universe. These leaps happen because the underlying explanatory logic transcends the immediate physical limitations. The system moves from handling specific instances to mastering the universal rule, governing all instances, unlocking infinite creative potential from a strictly finite set of basic components. This principle guarantees that once we uncover the deepest, most universal explanations, there is no boundary to what we can synthesize, simulate, or communicate across the cosmos. Understanding this universal computation forces us to confront the ultimate frontier of technology, artificial creativity, and the mind. Today, there is massive confusion surrounding artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Many assume that AGI is just a matter of scaling up processing power and data storage. This is a profound error rooted in behaviorism and trickery. When we look at standard approaches to the Turing test, we see systems relying merely on an accumulation of conversational tricks, vast lookup tables, and statistical pattern matching. These systems are fundamentally incapable of generating novel, unforeseen explanations. They simulate understanding without actually possessing it. True AGI cannot be achieved simply by mimicking human behavior or generating plausible text based on past data. True creativity requires the explicit digital replication of human explanatory power, the ability to spontaneously conjecture bold new ideas and aggressively criticize them to create genuinely new knowledge. As the maxim goes, if you cannot program it, you haven't truly understood it. We do not yet have AGI because we do not yet have a functioning epistemological theory of how human creativity actually works at the algorithmic level. Until we can digitally code the exact process of generating a hard to vary explanation, we will only have sophisticated parrots. The leap to true AGI will not come from a bigger database. It will require a fundamental philosophical breakthrough in how we define, understand, and codify the very essence of human conjecture and rational criticism. Once we unlock that specific philosophical architecture, we will be able to spawn digital minds that can actively participate in the infinite growth of universal knowledge. To truly grasp the architecture of this knowledge, we must look through a window on infinity. Mathematical infinity is not just an abstract concept. It is a physical reality that completely defies human intuition, proving that objective truth exists entirely independent of our common sense. The most elegant thought experiment to demonstrate this is Hilbert's hotel, a hypothetical hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all of which are currently occupied. If a new guest arrives at a finite hotel that is fully booked, they must be turned away. But in the infinite hotel, the manager simply moves the guest in room 1 to room 2, the guest in room 2 to room 3, and so on forever. Because there is no final room, this infinite shift easily accommodates the new arrival, freeing up room 1. You can even accommodate an infinite number of new buses, each carrying an infinite number of passengers, into a completely full hotel. The core insight here is staggering. In the realm of infinity, there is no such thing as an average room. Because the chain stretches endlessly outward, every single room is atypically close to the very beginning. This mathematical reality forces us to abandon our localized, finite prejudice. It teaches us that the universe operates on structural principles that often violate our primate intuition. To understand the cosmos, we cannot rely on what feels right. We must rigorously follow the hard to vary mathematical logic wherever it leads, even when it demands we accept the paradoxes of the infinite. When we follow that rigorous mathematical logic to its ultimate conclusion in physics, we arrive at the quantum multiverse, where we discover that knowledge acts as a cosmic coordinator. In the standard view of the multiverse, divergence is the natural state of reality. Normal physical errors, friction, and random quantum events continuously multiply, causing fungible, identical universes to constantly split and drift apart into entirely different histories. Left to its own devices, physical reality trends toward chaotic divergence. However, the phenomenon of knowledge creation uniquely reverses this cosmic trend. When a conscious entity discovers a true, hard to vary explanation, that specific piece of abstract knowledge aligns the behaviors and technologies of entities across multiple parallel universes. The discovery of a profound truth, like the cure for a disease, or the mathematics of flight forces, previously fungible universes, to synchronize their trajectories around that shared truth. In this deeply literal sense, explanatory knowledge is the only phenomenon in existence that causes disparate histories to converge rather than diverge. Knowledge acts as a fundamental, physical, structural force. It is not just a passive record of facts residing in the human brain. It is an active, coordinating anchor across the quantum multiverse. When we discover a true explanation, we are literally knitting together the fabric of divergent realities, bringing order to the chaotic splitting of the cosmos, and establishing an unbreakable anchor of objective truth across infinite parallel histories. This reveals that the human pursuit of science and philosophy is not a localized hobby on a small planet, but a mechanism of cosmic structural integrity. This epistemological framework dramatically redefines how we must structure our societies, leading us to the true purpose of political systems. Most political philosophies fall into the utopian trap. They operate under the delusion that the goal of a government is to mathematically calculate who should rule or to deduce the exact will of the people. However, as social choice theory and Kenneth Arrow's theorem have definitively proven, attempting to aggregate individual preferences into a single coherent will of the people is mathematically impossible and logically incoherent. Pursuing this utopian calculation inevitably leads to political paradoxes, systemic stagnation, and ultimately authoritarian enforcement. We must abandon this flawless calculus. Instead, we must adopt the Popperian criterion, named after philosopher Karl Popper. Politics is not an engine for selecting perfect leaders. It is fundamentally an engine for error correction. The only valid objective metric of a political system is how easily it allows society to discard failed ideas and bad rulers without resorting to violence. A successful democracy is characterized by a continuous cycle. We hold an election, enact better policies, aggressively criticize those policies when they inevitably reveal flaws, and peacefully remove them when they fail. If a system protects its leaders from criticism or makes peaceful removal impossible, it is a static, dying society. The genius of a free society is not that it makes the right choices, but that it provides a bloodless, structural mechanism to rapidly identify and correct its inevitable mistakes. Just as science thrives on falsifying bad theories, a thriving political system survives purely on its capacity to peacefully falsify bad governance. Ultimately, we must recognize that progress is the only sustainability. The modern obsession with sustainability, the desire to achieve a perfectly balanced, unchanging relationship with the environment, is a dangerous illusion. It is a modern manifestation of the Easter Island trap, a desire for stagnation. Human survival does not rely on finding a static equilibrium. It relies on an endless, dynamic journey of creating explicitly unsustainable solutions that inevitably provoke new, better problems. Every time we solve a massive problem, from agricultural shortages to energy production, we alter the environment and create the next necessary crisis. We survive by perpetually out innovating our current limitations. As we transition aggressively into the AI era, this dynamic is accelerating exponentially. Artificial intelligence will not establish a utopian plateau or a static endpoint for human effort. It will simply serve as a hyper accelerator for our error correction engine. It will automate the mundane aspects of computation, allowing human creativity to leap toward increasingly complex cosmic scale problems. We are not approaching the end of science or the final chapter of human history, because there is an infinite amount of knowledge yet to be discovered. We will forever remain at the absolute beginning of our intellectual journey. The architecture of infinity dictates that there are no bounds to what we can understand, what we can build, and how far we can reach, provided we never abandon the aggressive, creative pursuit of good explanations. Thank you. See you next time.